We see them all the time. The blue helmets in news reports from conflict zones, their famous headquarters in New York. But what is the United Nations really? Is it some kind of world government, a fancy debating society, or something else? Well, in this explainer, we're going to open up the hood and see how this global machine actually works. Just try to imagine it's 1945. The deadliest war in the history of the world has just ended. The question on everyone's mind, the one that overshadowed everything else, was this: how do we stop this from ever happening again? The stakes couldn't have been higher. But here's the thing. This wasn't the first attempt. After World War I, the world had put all its hope into a brand new organization called the League of Nations. It was born from that exact same desire for a lasting peace, a really noble idea. And the League's failures, well, they weren't just on paper. They had a devastating human cost. Picture this. It's 1936, and Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie stands before the League as Italy is invading his country. He made this incredibly powerful plea for help, and he was ignored. That moment became a tragic symbol of just how powerless the League really was. So what went wrong? Well, a lot. For starters, the United States, one of its main architects, never even joined. The League just stood by and watched as Japan invaded Manchuria and Italy invaded Ethiopia. By the time World War II broke out, the League was basically a ghost. It was a tough lesson. A global organization is doomed to fail if the world's biggest powers aren't on board. The sheer devastation of the Second World War created this new, desperate sense of urgency. Leaders like Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill were determined to try again, but this time to build something much stronger, something that learned from the League's mistakes. And the UN didn't just appear overnight. It was built piece by piece, starting as a wartime alliance. In fact, it was Roosevelt who came up with the name United Nations. After years of meetings and hammering out details, 50 countries came together in San Francisco to sign the UN Charter. And then, on October 24, 1945, it was official. The UN was born. And its mission, written right into that charter, was incredibly ambitious. It wasn't just about preventing war. It was about proactively building friendships between nations and coordinating action on a global scale. This was supposed to be the blueprint for a whole new way of doing things. So how do you even begin to tackle a mission that big? Well, the UN was built with a specific toolkit. It's 6 main bodies, or what they call principal organs. Let's break down what these are and what each one does. All right, let's do a quick tour. First, you've got the General Assembly. Think of it as a world parliament where every country gets a say. Then there's the heavyweight, the Security Council, which is all about peace and security. The Economic and Social Council tackles things like development. You've got the Secretariat, which is basically the UN's staff that handles the day-to-day. The International Court of Justice is the World Court. And finally, the Trusteeship Council, which is actually inactive now because its job of overseeing former colonies is all done. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the power dynamic between the two most powerful parts. The General Assembly has all 193 members, and it's all about one country, one vote. Very democratic, right? But its resolutions are basically just strong recommendations. The Security Council, on the other hand, is a much smaller club. And here's the kicker. Its 5 permanent members have veto power. A single no from one of them can stop a resolution dead in its tracks, and their resolutions can be legally binding. This right here is the central tension of the UN, a democratic ideal versus big power politics. And the person running the entire administrative side of things is the Secretary General. But this job is so much more than just an administrator. They are the world's top diplomat, a global mediator, and really the human face of the entire United Nations. Okay, so that's the structure. But what does it all look like in the real world? The UN's work really comes to life in 2 key areas: trying to keep the peace and trying to protect human rights. Just look at that number. Over 88,000 people. That really gives you a sense of the sheer scale of UN peacekeeping. We're talking about a massive global effort to stabilize regions that have been torn apart by war. And these peacekeepers are the famous blue helmets. Now, it's super important to remember, the UN doesn't have its own army. These are soldiers, police officers, and experts that are voluntarily sent by member countries. They operate under the UN flag, and their mandate is to be a neutral force. The other side of this coin is the mission to promote human rights. The bedrock of this work is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. This was a truly revolutionary document, heavily influenced by Eleanor Roosevelt, that for the very first time
laid out the fundamental rights that every single person on Earth should have.
But for all its grand ideals, let's be honest, the UN faces huge challenges. And in the 21st century, the questions about its funding, its biases, and whether it's even effective anymore have gotten a lot louder. A big part of the problem comes down to money. The UN relies heavily on just a handful of wealthy countries. The United States alone pays for 22% of the main budget. China and Japan are the next biggest contributors. And that dependence creates a massive vulnerability. If a top contributor decides to delay or withhold its payment to try and influence policy, it can cause a full-blown financial crisis for the UN, crippling its ability to function. It gives those countries a ton of leverage. And the criticisms are wide-ranging. People constantly point to the Security Council veto as the reason nothing gets done in major crises. There are endless complaints about bureaucracy and waste. And of course, the UN has been haunted by its most high-profile failures, like the genocides in Rwanda and Srebrenica, not to mention shameful accusations of misconduct and abuse by some peacekeepers. You know, this quote from the author Stanley Meisler seems to sum it all up perfectly. He said that while the UN never fulfilled the hopes of its founders, it accomplished a great deal. It's this strange paradox. It's fallen short of its own ideals, time and time again, yet its actual accomplishments are also undeniable. So this leaves us with a big question for our time. Is the United Nations a flawed, messy, but ultimately necessary tool for a chaotic world? Or is it an outdated idea from the 20th century that just isn't built for the challenges we face today? The answer, whatever it is going to shape the world we all live in.